Hi, welcome to our third week of Meetup. We apologize that we've started a little bit late. We were having trouble accessing Google and getting onto our account to do the Meetup through Google. So we've been fast and furiously trying to remedy the situation. And hopefully we've got it for the next 50 minutes. But this is week 3, and the focus of week 3 is dietary supplements. And so Heather and I have had some interesting conversations, even between the two of us, about supplements. And there's definitely some discussion and some interesting threads of students kind of weighing in on their perspective on supplements, what they take, what they don't take, their reasons why or why not. And the videos focus a lot on the regulation of supplements, some of the indications, some of the studies that had come out within that time period, and we're going to update on some newer ones today that have come out maybe since we were able to put the videos and resources together. So we will do that. And this is Heather Bumbelow. She is joining me each week to host these and to share and helping me do the research and background work too.
Yep, and I'm part of the teaching staff for the course, so you'll see my name throughout the discussion threads.
Yeah. Heather's a recent registered dietitian, having completed her education, her training, her internship, and passing a national exam to become an RD. And she just also got a real live job.
Yes. Yep.
As a health coach.
Yes. So health coaches, if you aren't familiar with health coaches, they can come from any health field background. And so quite a few dietitians do that. And I'll be just coaching people about making healthy goals, not only related to nutrition, but other aspects of health like stress and fitness.
And sometimes even medication compliance if people are on meds. Yeah, health coaching is becoming a larger field because, like we talked about, I think in the week 1, the doing of what you know to do is oftentimes the hard part of actually making it work in your life. And health coaches can kind of support people as they make those changes and help them strategize to come up with ways to kind of overcome some of the obstacles that they might have in terms of being able to make sustained change.
Yeah, so help hold them accountable too.
Yes. So, and I know Heather will do a great job at that. But on to supplements. A few general points, and then I wanted to share a few things about supplements. And we've got a variety of just different supplements, not endorsing any brand, any supplement. This is just some that we had around. Some of them are actually the samples that my students used that they gave to me when they did projects on supplements, which I will talk about too today. But in general, and some of this we talked about in the videos, people supplement for a host of reasons. Probably the most tried and true reason to supplement is to either prevent or treat a deficiency disease. When you have inadequate intake, inadequate stores, that then subsequently can display itself as actually a disease that has real symptoms and real consequences. And we know that supplements can help rectify that for certain nutrients. Other people take supplements just because they feel like it'll help improve their general health, promote their health. And some people take it because, they're in certain stages of life that they need extra nutrients. The link of supplements with chronic disease prevention is one that a lot of people are interested in, is how do supplements play into preventing heart disease, to preventing cancer, to preventing some of the diseases that plague us. And I think that's where a lot of the research is really fuzzy, is the role of supplementation in terms of disease prevention. And we'll talk about some of that today. And some people take supplements just to help with certain symptoms they have, whether it be, quote, lack of energy or muscle pain or joint pain, turning to supplements to potentially help them with those symptoms. And again, some may have some effect and some may not. So, and we certainly can't answer everything about them. And one thing Heather and I kind of talked about was that even researching one supplement takes a lot of time and depth to learn a lot about it, much less the multitude of supplements that are on the market. So it's really impossible to keep up with everything about supplements. That's why for the project this week, I led you to some websites that have content related to a variety of dietary supplements, herbal medications, and things like that to help people walk through that. But this morning, right before we came over, I just looked in my news list I get from our professional organization, kind of, Googled news to see what was out there in terms of supplements. And a few things popped up. One that I actually had shared in my class was a couple weeks ago, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Nutrition, which is a U.S.-based organization that has about 12,000 physicians, primary care, but other, cardiologists, other type physicians that are actually members. And then they also have other members. So it's about 150,000 member organization worldwide. And they're looking to promote good nutrition, translate nutrition research accurately, and do some lobbying in terms of positive nutrition policy. So, it is an independent organization, but they came out a couple of weeks ago with a statement and the encouragement to the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. Now, in week 1, we looked at the Dietary Guidelines, the 2010 edition, that recommended a host of things based on what was known at that point in time. And we've already seen some of the controversy from those guidelines on the discussion forum, like about the saturated fat being just kind of thrown in with trans fat, about sodium recommendations. And so in the next edition, which will come out in 2015, considering what's come out since 2010, and some of that will deal with saturated fat, some of that will deal with sodium levels. But this committee, Responsible Nutrition, was recommending that the dietary guidelines include multivitamin mineral supplements as part of their recommendations.
Wow.
Not necessarily just for select populations, which is really outside the box of what's been typically recommended. And just so that I won't misquote them, what they're saying, they encourage the committee to recommend multivitamins as a no-calorie, low-cost, convenient way to fill nutrient gaps when nutrient I can't read very well. Nutrient recommend intakes are not first met through food. So to actually do it as a policy. And secondly, they did want to underscore that supplements weren't to be viewed as a replacement for healthy food.
Right.
That a good diet is your first and foremost approach. So that was kind of interesting that there, and whether or not it's reflected in our dietary guidelines, I don't know. Because most of the professional organizations say you don't need supplements if you're eating a healthy, adequate, and well-balanced diet. And I think that group would say so too. But what they're acknowledging is that, particularly in the U.S., many people are not deficient, but consume suboptimal intakes of certain nutrients, a variety of nutrients, and that a multivite, just a general multivite might help fill some of those gaps.
Yes.
So, that was kind of interesting to see that come out. Another one that is sort of supplement related, because people use this sometimes to, boost metabolism, weight loss. But this was just kind of interesting. The headline was caffeine infused underwear is a thing, but the government said it won't make you lose weight. And this was actually 2 companies that were marketing and selling underwear that was infused with caffeine, with the claim that when you wore it around your fat cells, that it actually helped metabolize fat. Well, it caught the attention of the Federal Trade Commission, and these companies are now having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, in one case over $1 million, in claims, because of the false claims and misleading claims without evidence backing it up. So I just said, I hadn't seen anything about caffeine-infused underwear, but it would be easier than exercise or diet, I guess people thought.
Right.
So
Simple fix.
But it sadly, putting caffeine in your underwear doesn't appear to be effective. Another article in today's news list was the negative side of supplements, and it was talking about a variety of things, in part the amino acid and protein supplements, and that many of them are contaminated with things like mercury and lead, and that because of how they're manufactured, and because, of course, like here in the U.S., FDA can't go in and test every single supplement, that there are some potential risk in terms of toxicity, and particularly in those type supplements. And their effectiveness is sometimes questionable. I looked at a study this morning that looked at amino acids and protein supplements in an elderly population. And the study did not find that supplementing with amino acids and protein offset muscle loss or build muscle in that study. And so, the efficacy both in terms of, you can't build muscle just with protein. You have to also have the exercise that goes with it and the rest of the diet that supports it. So, and most people consume, particularly in westernized countries, sufficient protein anyway. I'm going to turn it over to you in a minute, Heather. I know I'm yakking a lot,
No,
but
it's okay.
And just, again, the efficacy of multivites, whether they work or not. Then just this week, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with recommendations about bone health in kids, and in particular with calcium and vitamin D. In just the summary of the report, they are not recommending calcium supplementation, that they recommend obtaining calcium through foods. And particularly, they recommend 3 to 4 servings of dairy a day. Now, that's going to really rile up some folks in our course, but that's what the American Academy, and they said also some alternatives, though, for children that don't consume dairy, was the dark greens, beans, calcium fortified products would be a way to, and then in terms of vitamin D, they make the point more so here that kids are likely to be D deficient or have suboptimal D status because they're not. And it does not say here that they're recommending D supplementation, but aside from, milk that may be fortified with D and sun exposure, there are really not many dietary sources of D. So, a supplement would really be not the only option, but, a viable option in that case. So, it was interesting to kind of look through those. And I think that was kind of the highlights. And I know Heather took another vantage point. I kind of looked at the news.
So I was curious what recent research articles have come out. And so I got on PubMed and some other reliable sources to search. And I just realized how overwhelming it is as not only as a dietitian, but we're also consumers, and just evaluating what is out on the store shelves and should we take them, how much should we take, how often, and
is it safe? Is it effective?
Yeah. And it's just very overwhelming to see all the research and how there's controversy. And then I think most of these articles end up concluding that future research needs to be done. So it is hard to make a specific recommendation, but I think it's important for each consumer to evaluate products themselves and really dive into the research before they just take something because they saw it on the news, or if their friends are taking it. They should definitely do some research and use that information to make a personal decision for their own health and their family's health.
Excellent points. So what did you find in just a few of the things you...
So in one of our recent media news articles, it was about vitamin E and selenium. So I also went to the source, the research article, and I think we even posted this on the Nutrition in the News page. I've been trying to keep that up to date with some of the things I've been seeing, or if you post in the discussion forum, I'll add that to the Nutrition in the News, just so everyone can see what's going on right now. And for vitamin E and selenium, they found that they did research on people with cataracts, and they found that long-term daily supplementation with selenium and or vitamin E, so in combination or separately, is unlikely to have a large beneficial effect on age-related cataracts.
Interesting. And both of those serve as antioxidants and actually have had in the past kind of people encouraging that towards prevention of cataracts. So it's not holding up again in the literature.
Yes, and then another one was just about flavonoids in general and its effects on ovarian cancer. And they found that higher intakes of flavonoids as well as black tea consumption may be associated with lower risk of ovarian cancer.
And the flavonoids are phytochemicals that are found in green tea, some other products, mainly black tea also, but your teas are rich in the flavonoids. And there's a lot of good research with the phytochemicals, but oftentimes through the food, yes, in terms of cancer prevention and risk, yes.
Yes. And then I did quite a bit of research on vitamin D and just its effect on different health statuses. And they did find one result said that vitamin D may improve the likelihood of healthy cognitive aging. So as people age, typically memory declines, nerve function will decline. So vitamin D may improve just the mental status.
And you found something you mentioned to me about even with vitamin D in kids with mental function and
Yes,
what was that?
That was
With
actually
depression?
with fish oil.
Oh, fish
or
oil.
omega-3 fatty
okay.
acids.
Whoops.
So, yes. So,
But you can go on with D. I didn't mean to interrupt
okay. Oh,
you.
yeah, we'll get to the fish oil and omega-3s. What else with vitamin D?
And I would say of the hot supplements,
mhm.
it's still D and omega-3s.
Yes.
And, those are the two that have the most number of prolific claims, all over the place in terms of the potential benefits and the way they relate. So, okay, go ahead.
Another systematic review showed that there's no current evidence or firm evidence that vitamin D supplementation decreases or increases cancer. So taking it doesn't necessarily benefit you or harm you in terms of cancer prevention. And again, that review said we need more trials on vitamin D supplementation.
And reviews tend to look at multiple studies. And so they're compiling the results from a numerous number of studies instead of being just an individual study.
And
they're kind of pulling them all together, yes, over time and looking what the evidence is showing from what the studies have been done.
So as a consumer, I would recommend looking at reviews because they sort of did the work for us. They considered all of the current and research that's been done over the years to help make it.
Sometimes they're called reviews, sometimes they're called meta-analysis, where they're looking at multiple studies simultaneously and looking and just comparing the results between studies and at the same time looking at the quality of those studies. Because oftentimes they'll pull all these studies and then they'll throw some out because the quality wasn't there, there weren't enough subjects, there was no control group, that there was a host of flaws in the research. So they ultimately end up trying to look at just the higher quality studies where they can actually have some validity in their results.
They also found, one trial that was over 6 months showed that high-dose oral vitamin D did not reduce blood pressure or the left ventricle of your heart, the mass of that, in patients who have hypertension. So, so vitamin D may not always reduce blood pressure. That's what we can get from that. And then also another meta-analysis showed that vitamin D does not alter the risk necessarily of stroke, cancer, heart disease, a wide variety of health issues. But it can reduce hip fractures, so it's important for bone health. So they found that in combination with calcium, vitamin D, so plus calcium, can reduce hip fractures. And I think they were using elderly patients for that one.
Although again, that's an area that's not a consensus. I mean, I've read other researchers who feel that using vitamin D as a strategy to prevent fractures, to prevent osteoporosis, doesn't hold out. But I think you made an important point in that it's partly in combination with calcium and phosphorus and other nutrients. And that's an important point there too, is that, I think some of our challenge with some of these things is when you try to pull out one thing and look at one thing, because we don't eat one thing and we don't eat one vitamin, we don't eat one mineral, that we eat a spectrum of food, we eat a spectrum of nutrients, and trying to look at the impact of one can be very challenging, not only in our own lives, but also in this research, and what are all the other factors that, these folks might have in common.
And a lot of nutrients have that synergistic effect where they work with each other. Finally, about vitamin D, one other study showed that they supplemented people who were trying to lose weight, and it didn't necessarily increase the weight loss. So vitamin D is not necessarily going to help.
Yeah, it's not the panacea. It's
Yep.
not the
Or the caffeine
Yeah.
underwear. So supplements don't always work for weight loss. All right, and then moving on to fatty acids, I found some wide variety of information about them. And as she mentioned before, they did a study on younger people who have depression or major depressive disorder, and they found that, I'll quote this, the use of omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids could be the first line of therapy in young people presenting with major depressive disorder.
Interesting.
And we know that
Interesting.
omega-3s have an effect on
Cognitive function.
right.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
interesting.
could potentially be used as a therapy. But again, more research needs to be done for that. And then there's other sources of omega-3 fatty acids besides fish oil, including flaxseed and krill oil. So I found that with flaxseed, they did a randomized, double-blinded clinical trial, and that's where double-blinded means the researcher and the participants don't know which treatment they're getting. So it was, they showed that flaxseed has an anti-hypertensive effect, so it can help lower blood pressure.
Great. That's an interesting one. And flaxseed adds not only omega-3s, but fiber and other things. Yeah.
And then for krill oil, those administered krill oil in this other study had a reduction in their triglyceride levels.
Which is what you find with omega-3s too. So it may be the omega-3 component rather than the oil source that is the component, because the krill has omega-3s, fish oil has omega-3s. So interesting.
Yeah.
So anything else of a particular note? And these are studies, like we say, that have come out since we put the course together, and even since we updated. It's because nutrition, I mean, this is literally this week.
Yeah, this is all
so
2014.
it's so hard to keep up with it all.
Again, another study found that omega-3 fatty acids can help with inflammation, and it improved endothelial function and arterial stiffness. So people who have cardiovascular disease.
I think an important point too to make about nutrients and supplements and all of that is that, you know, it's well proven that supplementation of particular nutrients can help prevent or cure deficiency disease. Like we know if someone has scurvy, that taking vitamin C can help treat their scurvy. What we don't know is that we know that having suboptimal vitamin mineral status may have detrimental effects, you know, and on our health, on a variety of factors. So definitely coming up to our needs and meeting our needs will help us. What the question is going above and beyond that. You know, for people that are already meeting, for example, their spectrum of water-soluble B vitamin needs, they're meeting that through their diet. Is taking a B complex on top of that going to do them any benefit? And I think, you know, in general, probably not. That it's meeting our needs, and, you know, that the extra supplemental is where a lot of that question's coming in, is that does it help you to go above and beyond? And it's not playing out in the literature that generally it does. That if, you know, and so that's one thing, is when you're picking a multivite, is not to pick one with mega doses. Pick one that doesn't go above 100% of, in the US, the RDA or the AI for nutrients, and in other countries, or the daily value sometimes on labels, you know, not the huge doses. That those probably, they're less detrimental coming through things like water-soluble vitamins, because like you noted earlier, you probably would urinate quite a bit of that out, but other ones may accumulate in your tissues. And so, you know, you have to be aware of that too.
Right, could reach a toxic level.
Even reach it. And that's, you know, in medical practice, with the use of supplements, with the use of foods that are fortified with additional nutrients, and combination with a diet, the risk of some parts of the population exceeding that upper limit, the UL, is there.
Mm-hmm.
And that practitioners, we don't see a lot of deficiency disease in the US, with the exception of iron deficiency anemia. We just don't see it. But we've started to see some of these toxicity and above level when people get a little overzealous about nutrients. And some have no UL established yet. We don't have enough data.
Right.
But what's interesting, Heather, and you mentioned some of this, and my students do a very similar project, a little bit more in depth than the one you do this week for week 3, where you evaluate a dietary supplement using websites, using medical literature, using also the products label and the products website, and kind of looking at all the data and comparing, looking at, what's the real story on these nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a taste. And like I said in the assignment, this certainly is not conclusive or comprehensive. I mean, you're only looking at a few sources.
Mm-hmm.
And my students go a little bit deeper and choose a supplement and walk through much of the same process. But in the summary statement, when they talk about what would they recommend or what are their reservations about this supplement, most of them all say things like, the supplement is unlikely to cure this. This supplement is unlikely to prevent that. Terms like evidence does not support, or a lot of may do this, appears to do this. There's very few definitive answers, probably short of folic acid and neural tube defects, birth defects. We can't say for sure a lot of things. So that's what makes nutrition hard, and what also makes it controversial is that people are going to have different opinions. And, when people make statements in nutrition, and I've had on the discussion board people say that I don't give much of my own opinion, that I'm, citing research, talking about government recommendations. Yes, because those are coming out from boards that have, researchers, experts, and this is after they've looked at everything, what they issue. Now, granted, there's folks that have some, issue with government-based recommendations, and there may be some issues with that. There may be, but if you look at across the board, American Heart, American Cancer, the US, all these things with their comprehensive recommendations, I'm not going to come out and personally give Jamie's dietary guidelines because they're based upon what we know to date. And I can't keep up with everything we know to date. So it's tough. And the supplements is the same thing. I mean, you continue to see these terms, insufficient evidence, lacks sufficient research, that we are learning so much.
Right.
And with supplements, I think the bottom line right now is that some people benefit from them when they have increased needs, or their diet is definitely suboptimal, that whether it be an individual supplement or in some cases a multi, that they may benefit from that, but certainly not just using them to prevent something is probably not going to always play out. Did you have some other thoughts too?
Yeah, as we were going through some of her undergraduate students' work, so
they do these
some
projects.
Of those
this one even gave me a picture of their supplement.
And we brought in some of the supplements, if you can see these in front of us, that they use for their projects. And
many more. I have 180 students, so we get to read about 180 different, not necessarily different supplements. And that's interesting too, Heather, is that I get a lot of students that, of course, decide to investigate omega-3s. And they look at different sources because they only have to look at a select number. And I'm always interested how students arrive at different conclusions or different recommendations. Like vitamin C, I read 2 papers. One said, I would not hesitate to recommend supplemental vitamin C to everyone, to take 1 pill a day of vitamin C. The other student said that, there's no reason if you're eating an adequate and balanced diet to take extra vitamin C. And with C, the research doesn't play out at all, that it prevents the cold, that it cures the cold. It may help reduce symptoms and it may help shorten the duration of a cold, but it's not going to play out in preventing it.
Right.
So
that's good to know, especially as the winter season
Yes.
here in the U.S. is coming, where a lot of us do get colds. So vitamin C, like taking those mega doses, isn't necessarily warranted, but as you said, it can help decrease the duration or your symptoms, but it doesn't necessarily prevent you getting colds.
A lot of my students don't eat a lot of vegetables and fruits, which are the primary sources of C through food. So, they may benefit from a C supplement or the C that's within a multivite because their diets are more limited and restricted, whether it be from what they have available or whether it be from their personal choices of food. But what's interesting too is despite low fruit and vegetable consumption, when I look at vitamin C status, most of them are above 100%. And that's because they're consuming beverages, some of the fruit flavored beverages that are fortified, that on the label it says contains 100% of vitamin C. So they're getting it through other foods. So then in those cases, they probably don't need to pop a pill to get that C. But a couple of other studies that I just pulled this morning too, that are 2014. This one just showed that insufficient evidence, there's that term again, that omega-3s protect against overall cardiovascular events, particularly among people that have already had cardiovascular issues. And this one is that, again, with heart disease, no evidence to support the use of vitamin and antioxidant supplements. And this was a systematic review and meta-analysis that came out this year. So I guess the story is, supplements are not going to cure all our ills, but they may have their place in certain circumstances. And in one of the videos, I list some of the indications for supplementation, what subgroups may need supplements. And, even women of childbearing age, particularly if their diet isn't sufficient, folate, calcium, iron may be warranted. And, smokers, the water-soluble vitamins, B vitamin C, a low-level supplement, never a big mega dose, but the low level. And D is this my D?
It is.
I mean, personally, and I'm not endorsing this is my personal practices. I take D, particularly in the fall and winter months when I'm not outside, because I walk a lot. So, I get some sun exposure. And of course, if I'm out a lot, I'm going to use sunscreen. But if I'm just walking around the block, I was going to say let it all hang out, but I let my arms get the sun. And so I'm not really that concerned. And what's interesting too is you store up D. Like if somebody's a lifeguard at a pool all summer, they actually store up D that may conceivably get them through the winter months.
Wow, yeah.
So, but supplemental D, I do take supplemental D. And one interesting thing too with D is you don't have to take it every day.
Okay.
That because it's fat soluble, that they've done studies actually with folks that supplement with a certain level daily and folks that supplement with a higher level less frequently, and their blood levels are the same. So, because it's different than the water soluble vitamins. And then I usually take an omega, a fish oil, 1 or 2. I do eat fish, but it's just there's a lot of good evidence, and I don't think there's harm for some people that are on anticoagulants or some other issues. Probably have to think twice, but I take that, and then not every day, but occasionally I take a multivite, and I take Women's Ultra Silver, which is for these old people because I'm postmenopausal, so I don't need the iron that a young person does.
Right.
But Heather's is a women's formula.
Yes, with iron, 100% of the daily value of iron.
So, you do find these combination supplements with vitamins and minerals that are kind of designed for certain age groups. You see for men, the men's is not going to have iron or have very little iron in it. Postmenopausal women, I don't think there's any iron in this at all. No, iron 8 milligrams, which is the recommended intake for a woman over menopause, but it's 18 milligrams pre-menopause. So, and I wanted to note, because a lot of my college students take gummy vitamins because they like them and they taste good.
Sometimes
And
it's just hard to swallow those big
yeah, so they
pills.
they love these gummies. But the challenge with gummies, particularly for women, is they do not contain iron.
Is that because of taste?
It's partly because of taste, but it's also because of the risk of toxicity. One of the number one causes of poisoning, toxic poisoning in children and potentially death, is iron supplement overdose, getting hold of iron supplements. So gummies don't contain iron because kids could conceivably look at them as candy.
Snack, yeah.
And eat way too many. And my college females don't realize they're not getting iron through these because it says complete here. And so unless you know to look and think about it, and that is really a supplement that many of my college women need. I mean, among college age women, 25% are estimated to be poor iron status, potentially deficient in iron. So, a combination of their diets during college and blood loss through menstruation, that they're susceptible. And that, so this isn't going to necessarily do that job for them.
Yeah. So what's the best way to know if someone needs iron? You can get tested.
You can get your blood tested, and usually it's part of a routine annual, is that they check your iron status, particularly for women, to see if you're deficient or suboptimal iron, and hopefully your healthcare provider would tell you that. You can maintain iron levels with, adequate intake. To treat an actual iron deficiency, you may need even higher doses that would be monitored by a healthcare provider. But I tell my college girls, if they're feeling particularly fatigued, if they're pale, if they're having trouble concentrating, I mean, there's a lot of symptoms of iron deficiency anemia that kind of can give you that cue. And then I say, go to student health, get your blood checked, see what your iron status is. Most of the studies show that a pretty hefty percentage, 15% of all women age 20 to 49 are estimated to have iron deficiency anemia. And many of those don't know it. They just don't feel good. They just don't have energy. So preventing it, and I'm not necessarily saying with iron, but, and the other challenge with iron too is a lot of folks restrict red meat, which, is certainly a positive choice, and we're pushing more plant-based diets. But as a side note, the iron that's in red meat, in particular heme iron, is the most bioavailable. I mean, that's fact.
Absorbed well.
More so than the non-heme iron that you find in plant foods. Now, you can certainly get sufficient iron from plant foods. And vitamin C actually helps with the absorption of iron. So that's a positive there. But anyway, so do we have any questions coming in from our studio audience?
As a reminder, yes, we do. Okay, good.
Oh, and we've used up a lot of time.
Yes. All right, so we'll start fielding questions. And to do that, if you're logged in, you can send in questions, and we'll do what we have time for.
And some of these, I don't, somebody's asking here, what about Q10? I don't know enough about Q10 to really, it's not a essential nutrient in terms of being a vitamin or mineral. It's a supplement that I know people use sometimes for congestive heart failure, sometimes to minimize some of the impacts of taking statins, which lower blood cholesterol. Some of the side effects, Q10 seems to help. But in terms of, I don't know enough about the literature and the bottom line to answer that. So maybe if you haven't done so, walk through Project 3 and look at Q10. Look at Q10, see what's out there. Because again, it can change week by week in terms of the data.
Here's a question on D3. I currently use vitamin D3 as a supplement under my doctor's orders, as some of my medications make me very sun sensitive. The other use of vitamin D3 is for neuromuscular disorders such as neuropathy.
Okay.
Do you have any information that counters this effect on neuropathy? In my case, in relation to diabetes.
I hate to say it again. I mean, I don't know specifically. I haven't looked at the impact of D3 in terms of its impact in that way to be able to make like a definite decision. But, I'm sure that just general good D status is going to help a multitude of factors, just including neuropathy. But you want to tell us, we're saying D3, and this label says D3.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to tell us, Miss just passed the registration exam, the difference between D3, why it says 3
Instead of another number.
instead of a number?
I know there's also D2, and
D2
D2 comes from plant sources, and D3 is from the animal sources and is more active, I'm assuming.
Is it the type that we synthesize through our skin?
Not animal sources, I'm thinking.
But
humans,
no, that may be true. That may be true.
Yeah, we're mammals. So yeah, when the sun hits our skin, D3 is the type that is coming from
see,
that.
this has some animal sources in it, gelatin and such. So like a vegan would probably take D2 if they were trying to avoid anything that had any type of animal source. But it's, it's not going to add negative components. But some folks advocate for D3 in terms of effectiveness and bioavailability over D2. But it's sometimes hard also to keep up with all that. So.
I know I mentioned earlier about flaxseed supplements. And we have a question, should flaxseed be ground up? Because if you just eat the whole flaxseed, it might just go right through you. So grinding
Interesting point.
Yeah, so grinding up flaxseed, I think, is very important because digestion and absorption is all about creating more surface area. So like the finer the particle is, it's going to be touch like more surface area in your GI tract. So if you grind up flaxseed, it's going to be absorbed better because when it's whole, it's covered in those like lignins and fiber content, that hard.
So it's harder for your body to get at it.
Yeah, like we don't have the enzymes to break that down.
See,
so
I never really
up flaxseed
thought of that. Now I buy flax, and it's not the seed form. It's like the ground.
The ground,
so
milled flaxseed.
That I'll add to baked goods and things like that.
Yeah.
So
I'll put it in my yogurt sometime
and I did that part in because I didn't like the texture that the flaxseed added in those particular products. That I liked the effects of the ground and the powdered flaxseed. But interesting. And this one is talking about herbal supplements. And learned about some of the serious interactions that they can have with prescription meds. And I was surprised, this individual, he or she, was surprised that a stronger warning wasn't on the label. Warnings on the prescription drug labels, typically not necessarily. I mean, they will say, potential interactions when you read that long, thorough fold out. And I think that's what's interesting too. When you look at prescriptive meds, they often come with this, front and back, huge document
information sheet,
all the potential side effects, contraindications, interactions with other drugs or medications, and I haven't looked specifically to see if herbs are listed there, but some are pretty well known. We don't know as much about herbs as we do medications. Medications, drugs that are prescription meds go through a lot of evaluation. A lot of clinical studies, and herbal therapies don't necessarily get that kind of thorough investigation. But in essence, most of your herbs are truly dilute drugs, that they just don't have the level of potency that a prescription med might have, but they may have drug-like effects. So this individual makes a very good point. And what I guess one of the takeaways is when you see your primary care provider, particularly if you are on meds, is to tell them when you begin taking any kind of herbal supplement and what that supplement might be. Now, I'll almost guarantee you that they probably won't have any idea about the interaction because it's hard. Again, healthcare providers have a hard time keeping up. Now, if they are, say, a cardiologist and they routinely prescribe certain medications, they may be very aware of which like you're on Coumadin, you wouldn't want to take fish oil, but that's not a herb. But, that they may be aware. But you would want to let your healthcare provider know what supplements you're on, both
herbal, vitamins,
mineral, whatever supplement, because of the potential of how it might affect your condition or how it might interact with any medications they
Yes.
prescribe, whether it be a medication, an interaction that amplifies a side effect, or it blocks the action of the medication.
Exactly.
So, you know, there's a host of reasons to look into that, but it sounds like you might have looked at that for your project. And there's actually better research on the vitamin and minerals than there are on the herbal supplements. Oftentimes there's just not the money in investigating them thoroughly. You know, they're sold over the counter for $3.99 a bottle. Well, how can you do a multi-million-dollar trial
On all of them.
when you only sell it for that price? You know, if herbal medicines were sold as drugs, they'd have to go through that same approval process. And I can guarantee the cost to the consumer would go up markedly,
Right.
because they have to offset all the expense.
I know when I was working in the hospital, as dietitians, we have these food nutrient interaction books. So you can look up, or it's drug and food interactions. So if patient's on a drug, you can look that drug up. And we also have like database systems to do that too. And it'll give different herbs and other like nutrients that can interact with it. So
in
there's
the
some
clinic-
research, and clinical,
Yeah.
it's very important.
So in the clinical setting, those practitioners may be more aware or have
Mhm.
access to the information that would let them know.
Yes.
So it's great to let
Mhm.
your doctor or your nurse practitioner know. Oh, this is a good one.
The function.
Great question.
So functionality wise, is there a big difference between store brands and generic supplements versus the ones with the brand names?
That's a great question.
Yes.
That is a great question. And bottom line, probably not a big difference.
Right.
That, you know, say a drugstore or a pharmacy brand may be less expensive, or in the US, we have these big warehouse stores like Sam's, Costco, that may sell their own brands at a much less cost than, say, a Centrum type multivite. But be very similar. And oftentimes those are similar. Now, not always. And some of the more reputable brands actually send their supplements out to be independently tested by labs,
Right.
to look for purity, to look for like determine a shelf life, a lot of different factors. So sometimes that's different. And some of your more reputable brands may have, you can depend on them more, that they have what they say they have in it. And because they've been independently tested, some of the more generic brands may not go through that kind of independent lab. Doesn't mean that there's a difference, though. It just means that, you know, in terms of a trust of a product, you might be able to trust more. But ultimately, you know, vitamins and minerals are molecules or a combination of molecules. And so chemically, even quote natural versus synthetic, in the most cases are identical in terms of their chemical structure. And so a generic brand would use the same, you would think, chemical structure, you know, the same molecules in their supplement as the other supplements. So typically not. One thing I tell people to look for is, and I was noticing this, and I don't think you can see, but the difference like between yours, Heather, not to say yours is bad, but this is a Centrum. Well, I won't say a brand, but this is a multivite for women. And this is another multivite. This one looks like it has about 24 components. This one looks like it has
a lot more,
maybe 40. So the spectrum's a little different in terms of the number of nutrients. So you'd kind of want to look, what are you looking for? Iron, calcium, and also multivites do not have 100% of your calcium. Most of your multivites have 15 to 20% of your calcium, in part because it would make the pill so big you couldn't take it. And there's interactions like between calcium and iron that it's better not to take iron and calcium at the same time necessarily. That, you know, they compete with each other or interfere with absorption. So, and also looking for the numbers, making sure they're not 400 and 500, 1,000%, that they're around, you know, 50, 100%. You're going to note that some have very little, like potassium and phosphorus, And that's in part because the potential of too much of those minerals can have adverse effects. So they have to limit it in a supplement. So
I think overall it's best for consumers to compare products when they're shopping. And then also she mentioned some are laboratory tested, and you can, some of these, I know this one says laboratory tested on it, and there's a little picture. So that's something that's good to look for.
And as I talked in the videos, in the US, the claims supplements can make on their actual label are regulated in terms of how they can state the claim, what they can say, what claims are approved, what ones are not, and if they're not approved, how they can kind of get around it by saying things like may support, or, you know, kind of vague. It's structure function claims rather than direct disease risk type claims. So I don't know how those are regulated in other countries, but here you're supposed to be truth in label. And the supplement industry, you know, one of the big messages is it's a consumer beware industry. You know, you have to kind of keep up, and, you know, people have a hard time keeping up. We have a hard time keeping up, and we're dietitians. So there's a lot. I'm not sure how we're doing on time.
Yeah, we only have a couple more minutes. So we can do at least one more question. And here's a question that says, on which occasion is it just enough to change your diet according to improve some deficiency of one or another vitamin or mineral? And when can you get it only from a supplement? Are there any ways to detect your deficiency except with a blood test? So I know with deficiencies, there's going to be common symptoms related to that deficiency, but also the symptoms could be related to other health issues.
And many of the vitamins and minerals alike have very kind of vague deficiency symptoms that
Fatigue
are tough.
that
are tough to like diagnose and say it's this or that. Some have very apparent, you know, deficiency symptoms. And like this student says that, you know, you can check for many with a blood test. The hair test are really not, the research didn't show that they're very effective in really assessing status for most people. That, you know, definitely a blood test for most is your best indication of status for vitamins and minerals. But the question about diet, one thing, my students do a diet analysis project, and students in here did a version of that for their first week. And they look at what supplements, what vitamins and minerals their intake was less than 75% of. And then how do they rectify that is kind of one of the questions. And, you know, definitely dietary improvements can help, and help, you know, with potassium, help with other ones, but some like vitamin D. I mean, a lot of my students have 4% vitamin D. That's not taking into account sun. But, you know, a D, that's not one you can rectify with diet alone. Somebody that's actually iron deficient could not necessarily rectify a deficiency with diet alone, or even a basic multivite. Like I said earlier, they may need a higher dose under the supervision of a physician to actually bring their iron status back up. But, you know, that's a great question. And part of it is whether you're maintaining your status with an ongoing healthy diet, or whether you're trying to rectify a deficiency. You know, that may take a little different approach. Than the two. But great question.
All right. Well, we are done with time. So what about next week?
Well, actually, we're going to do something special in 2 weeks rather than have a meetup next week. In 2 weeks, we're actually going to go over to Vanderbilt's new student recreation. I forget what they call it now.
Kitchen.
Yeah, and they have a beautiful facility with a test kitchen. And for kind of combining next week superfoods, functional foods, and that superfoods concept is kind of a controversial one. Maybe we'll talk about. But and the plant-based diet, we're actually going to do a cooking demo, and at the same time talk about new research coming out about plant-based diets, and also field questions. And we'll actually have some Vanderbilt folks there too. Employees are invited to attend. So we are going to do kind of a bigger deal in a couple of weeks, and we will be letting you know more about that. But thank you very much. I hope you're learning from the course. I hope it's making you think. I have to say I appreciate the differences of approach and perspectives and opinions. And I am certainly always learning from you, and then also from, trying to keep up with everything, which is often a challenge. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple weeks, and we'll see you in the discussion forums too.